So, the translations are out for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 401, and let's just say that we once again have the story claim another life of a most likely fan infamous character. Yeah, you'll get to see who potentially bites the dust in this chapter and what's going to be going on with another character. But first, right after this. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man Drew, and I'm here to do my manga review for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 401, titled The Lunatic. And if that title doesn't give it away on who the main focus of this chapter is going to be, well, I'm about to reveal it to you very soon, because obviously from the title of this chapter and what we get in this chapter, we're going to be getting a final character hurrah, a final character death. And who's going to be the one dying? I think we already know who it's potentially going to be. So let's talk a little bit more about this chapter when it comes to these particular characters, as well as what it really means for the story overall and what this is leading to when it comes to another character story. And for starters, let's just address the elephant in the room, the potential death of Stain. Because we do get at the beginning of the chapter an understanding of how Stain got to the location. We do know for a fact that he was eavesdropping on Ida and Shoto, and that due to his eavesdropping and as well as all of the blood and destruction that he followed and his interaction with All Might earlier on in the story, he knew what All Might smelled like, he smelled the blood, and he was able to lick it and determine that it was actually All For One, as we get a little bit more of recontextualization of their conversation that they had during the Dark Deku arc. And we get a better understanding of what Stain was trying to do when he was talking about All Might, or talking to All Might, about how there was no other way for All Might to live, and that when it comes to someone who was once a god prostrating on the ground, we get a recontextualization of what he was really saying. It is not that he just wanted All Might to continue fighting, but he also wanted him to continue to live. He still wanted to embody the ideals that All Might instilled inside of everyone, but he also wanted All Might to also more or less value his life a little bit more. And how he's very happy that All Might was able to understand this when it comes to the fight against All For One. Because we need to realize that while Stain wants All Might to live, he also wants All Might to live as he was. So when he is saying that he wants him to live, it could be in the way of living as the hero that he was, giving his all to defeat the villains, or that he just wants him to continue to live on to inspire more people. But either way, the idea of All Might fighting does not contradict the idea of him wanting to live. Because in reality, all heroes want to live, but they're also willing to sacrifice themselves to make sure that others are safe. And how All Might, like Deku, took it a little bit too far. What Stain wanted him to do is reel it back, which he has, but he is still very much in the core of who he is, All Might wanting to fight to make sure others are safe. So when it comes to what Stain was trying to do, we get to see that it's actually not that removed from what All Might is doing right now, because if it was, he would actually be chastising All Might in this moment instead of supporting him fighting against All For One. And that's only a part of Stain's character when it comes to this chapter, which unfortunately actually leads to his potential death at the end of this chapter. Because unfortunately, because All For One knew about Stain's existence, we actually get to see a very cool interaction right before Stain is able to cut him, where All Might, even though he's unable to move, he can still use his quirks. Where he used Force Quirk Activation and Phlebotomy, which is basically cutting the hole into someone and allowing for blood to drain out, which is something that was very much used during bloodletting. But that's not actually the way that he was able to avoid Stain's blood curdle, because later on he reveals that he actually knew that Stain would probably try to go against him because he was the only villain that didn't join him on Taurus, and that he actually was able to change the antigens in his blood, so even if Stain were to lick his blood now, it would not be All For One's blood anymore, and so the quirk wouldn't have an effect on him. So he kind of had this planned, but this wasn't necessary specifically for Stain, because this was a quirk that he would have had prior to make sure that he never got caught for the many and many of decades that he was alive and a villain. And because of this action by All For One, Stain pays a critical price of having his body crunched on by the hands coming out of his mouth, thrown against a game corner like building, taking heavy damage, and eventually All For One coming in, saying that he has fulfilled the role of helping Tomura and the League grow, taking his quirk and causing a big blood splatter, implying that he has currently died in this moment. And yes, it's very unfortunate, but even with those last moments, and even with All Might coming to try and help and save Stain, in this moment, Stain, in his final moments, declares his love for All Might, getting a little bit more information from him about how he never graduated high school, but that he learned what it meant to be a hero from All Might, and with his last words saying that All Might should keep living because All Might was his every before the implication of his death. So in the end, Stain died how he lived, with his ideals relatively intact and accomplishing what he wanted to do, supporting All Might, and being more or less the critical ideal to keep All Might living, to keep Toshinori alive. And very much how his role in the story when it came to Tomura and the League of Villains ended very swiftly, so has his role for All Might as well as his life also ended quickly. And that's pretty much what a large chunk of the story or a large chunk of the chapter was focusing on, which was Stan and his ideals and what they meant towards All Might. But then we focus more on All Might towards the end of the chapter, as All For One has stolen Blood Curdle potentially and is about to fire an attack at All Might. But luckily enough, the remaining shields, most likely the 33% that was not destroyed by that laser attack earlier, comes in to try and protect All Might, once again reiterating the idea that All Might should live, as it declares that, as we see that it gets completely destroyed and All Might's armor is completely blown to smithereens by this one attack. And we do not know if it packs the same amount of punch as the laser-like attack that he used during Gigantomachia or the initial fight against All Might, but we do know that the damage is very much intense to the point where All Might is pretty much hallucinating both Nana Shimura as well as Night Eye, as these illuminations are trying to encourage All Might to keep fighting on, as even with all of the damage that he has taken, his legs not working and he is still on the ground, he is still willing to fight because he's not dead yet. So he declares to All For One to come towards his direction, as we get to see that the UA flying barrier is very much in the background, where we get the confirmation that Tomura is in range of All For One's Gloop quirk. End of chapter. And there's a fair amount of implications that we can really get from this final part of the chapter. And not only that, we do and are pretty much about to get the finalization, most likely, of All Might's character. And from what we get with this chapter, I am actually not fully convinced now that All Might will actually die, because of how much we are re-emphasizing the idea that he needs to live and that he needs to keep on living. So I think that this chapter is going to be very much critical to determine what it means for the story until probably a few chapters after this, where we get the confirmation of what's going to be happening with All Might and what's going to be happening with All For One and Tomura Shigaraki. Because at this moment, All For One is a little bit cooled down, so he may not actually want to go after All Might in this moment. However, because it is All For One, he is still being influenced by the rage and the anger of Tomura, so I wouldn't be surprised if he actually decided to once again try and go after All Might in this moment. But I think that most likely what he's probably going to do is probably a mixture of both. He may try to go after Tomura in this moment while also going after All Might and trying to kill him. And that by doing so may actually put him at the perfect moment to be destroyed and killed off, either by erasure or by Tomura potentially coming through the portal and killing him while he's distracted and trying to kill All Might. And potentially Deku also coming in this location to save All Might as well, due to the fact that it is confirmed that they are close to the area where they are fighting. Now, whether or not it is happening at the moment that they touch down on the ground or due to the fact that they may still be in UA, we are not sure due to the timeline of events not being exact. But it's very possible that they are either on the ground or in UA, and that when this is happening, All For One could have died by the hands of All Might, either via erasure or potentially the final quirk that he hasn't shown off, which could be Bakugo's. Or what would be even more interesting is if Bakugo came from UA and started fighting against All For One in this moment and was partially responsible for defeating him, as well as being sort of kind of that secondary or that final part of the suit that All Might may have had. But overall, I thought that this was a very good chapter, not just for what it's going to mean for All Might's future for the next few chapters, but pretty much the perfect end, I would say, for Stain as a character. Someone who very much idolized heroes for everything that they have done has tried his best to save All Might, the person that inspired him. And that while his methods were very much morally dubious at best, he still had a sort of like righteous morality at his core, whether or not he should have actually acted upon it when it came to the more negative aspects of it. And that him dying to make sure that All Might lives not only bears a better fruit on All Might living, but also just the general idea of people willing to sacrifice their lives for others, just to make sure that they are able to keep living and keep moving forward. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the chapter. So let me ask you, what do you think of the chapter? Do you like Stain's death, most likely from what we get with this chapter? And do you think that All Might is still potentially going to die by the end of the series? Leave your thoughts down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to see more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!